Now, if you have followed me carefully in the last few lessons, you may notice that even if I go in and start moving my head animation control around, I didn't parent my global animation control to the movements of the head control. And the reason why is that because I want to show you a nice little method here that you can use to add a custom attribute that will enable you to either turn the parenting system of this object here on and off. And so this is the dynamic parenting system we will be building in this course. So instead of parenting this using the traditional parenting feature, we will use the parent constraint and create a custom channel that will let us either enable or disable the parenting of this global eye animation control to the head control. So first, what we will be doing is selecting our global eye animation control, and let's make sure to add a custom channel here. So we know already how to do that. We will go to modify and select the add attribute feature. Once we do that, we will be presented with our add attribute dialog box. And first we'll start by adding a separator here so that we know the channel that we'll be using to driver custom channel here. Make sure that we are making this attribute displayable, and then let's hit the add. Then we'll add another custom channel, and this one here, it is what's going to be used to drive the movements of the global eye control here. So this is going to be called follow head. Make sure this is keyable and the data type is set to float. Then we'll make sure to set some limits here. The minimum is going to be 0 and the maximum is going to be 1, and by default it is going to be set to 0. Let's hit the OK button so that we can apply and close out the add attribute dialog box. You can see right here that we have managed to add these new custom channels. And now at this point here, what we'll be doing is adding the parent constraint. Now we are not going to be adding the parent constraint right on top of the anim eyes control here, because we want to keep the control here clean, and so we don't animate on top of the lockdown channels by the parent constraint. And this is why we'll be creating a group to set up and to receive that parent constraint option. Okay, so first, to group that object here, we can either hit the Control G. Okay, so if we hit the Control G, it is going to create a pivot point right at the origin. However, we don't want that. We want the pivot point to be right the middle of the global eye control. So let's undo back here. Another option to use to get this kind of behavior here is by going to edit. Then we will choose this time the group from here, and we will not choose the group itself. Instead, we'll bring its settings. By default, if we reset the settings, you will notice that once we hit that group option, Maya will go ahead and use this group pivot mode here to set up the pivot at the selected option. By default, it is set to origin. That is why when we created that group, Maya have gone ahead and placed the pivot points of our group right at the origin. However, we can go in and change that to center, and now if we go in and use the group, you will notice that the group here, its pivot points are right at the center, exactly where we want it to be. And so we can now go in and rename this group here to pair CNS for parent constraint underscore eyes underscore GRP for group. Great. If we go in and take a look in the outliner, here is the group that we just created, and our eye animation controls are lying underneath. Okay, great. Now we can safely go in and apply that parent constraint to this group here. So with our animation head control selected, we'll select the group, and then we'll go to constraint and parent constraint. Make sure the maintain offset is turned on so that we can keep this offset here between both the eyes and the eye controls as well as the eye bones here, because if you go in and turn the maintain offset off, if I hit the apply, you will notice that we are getting this flipping issue here. If I go in and hide my model here, you will see that here is the pivot points, or here is the control here, and this is not what we want. And this is also the reason why we are creating, let me go in and undo back a few times here. This is also the reason why we are creating the animation or the eye animation controls far away from the bones or the eye bones themselves. And that is because if I go in and take, for example, this control here, if I go in and move it so close to the eyes, you will notice that we are getting this flipping issue here. And so either way, either if we create or set up the eyes using the IK system or setting them up using the aim constraint, you always want to make sure that you place the eyes far away from the objects and not so close to avoid this flipping issue right here. Okay, so let me undo back a few times. And so again, we want to apply the parent constraint and make sure that we select the head animation control first, then the group that is containing our eye animation control. So let's select again the head control curve, then we'll select the parent constraint group we just created. Make sure maintain offset is turned on this time, and we'll hit the add, and right away you can see here is the parent constraint applied. Now if we go in, by default you will see that the group is going to follow just fine and is going to drive the objects within it as well. Okay, however, if I go into the and select the group that contains this eye global control here, if I go in and select the control itself, hit the up arrow to grab the parent group, which is the one that we applied the parent constraint to, you will notice here is the parent constraint that we just applied. So you can see that the translate and rotation fields are being locked down by the parent constraint. And here is the attribute that we can use here to switch between on and off. If I set this to 0, you can see that the eyes are no longer moving or following the head movements. If I now go in and again switch that feature here, with this attribute provided by the parent constraint to on, you can see that I'm able to switch between either follow or not follow the head movements. However, this kind of attribute that we are getting here is not, you can see that we are getting a snap here. We are not getting a smooth transition between the following and not following. Instead, we want a smooth transition. This is why we want to add keyframes on top of this group here, so that when we go in, we can blend between the keyframes and the already existing parent constraint. And that is what's going to give us that blendable parameter that we can use to set up this smooth transition. So let me go in and show you how to do that. By default, Maya, if you go in and search under the settings and the preferences, if you go into the animation here, you will notice that if you go all the way down into the animation blending here, Maya will always blend with existing connection. And so this is what's being used when we go in and apply a animation keyframes, and that is what's gonna give us that blending ability. So if I now go in and grabbing first the parent constraint group, let's go in and hit the Shift E and Shift W to lock both transition as well as rotation fields here, because if you take a closer look, when we start moving the head control, we want the global eye animation control to follow in both transition and rotation. And so this is why we are now locking down both channels or both transformation types here, the translate and the rotate. And so you can see that these are now being recolored to green, which means that we have a blend between two types of connection, be it plugged in, the parent constraint, and also the animation keyframes. And so Maya have gone ahead, and if you take a closer look, Maya have given us this blend parent. So this is exactly the channel that we will be using to blend. Now if I take now the head animation control, start moving this around, you'll notice that the global eye control is still put. However, if I go into the group, and this time not changing this one here but this one, if I start working with that, here's the nice and smooth transition effect that we are looking to get. So this is the kind of effect that we want to look for, and not that snapping behavior we had before. So this is looking a lot smoother and much better. And so what is left now to do is just set up some connection here using the connection editor to lock and to connect the channel that we just created here to that blend parent channel. So this is going to be very easy to accomplish. We just go under the general editors and we look for the connection editor. So we want to select the animation control and not the group. So the animation control, the object or the attribute that we want it to be the driver, we want to load that to be in the left section here, and then we'll select the group. So with our control, animation control still selected, let's hit the up arrow to grab its parent group, and we want to reload that to right. And so now this is going to be very simple. We just need the follow head parameter we created to control the blend parent. And so you can see that we have managed to set up that connection. So if I now go in and start moving my head control around, if I go in and grab my global eye animation control and start working with this follow head, here is the nice and smooth transition we are getting. So you should be very proud of yourself with the setup that you have just managed to accomplish. So this is the parent or dynamic parenting system that we have managed to use using custom channels and using the parent constraint and the connection editor. And also you can see if I go in and start using the global neck control, this is also applied to that as well. And so that's going to be pretty much it for this video. We have learned how to set up an awesome dynamic parenting system to drive the eyes of our character.